It has now emerged that shadowy organized criminal groupings running the clandestine human trafficking business have local contacts and foreigners involved in illegal recruitment and trafficking of persons posing as business people in the country, the informer has established.
We have to break the cartels and streamline the agencies, some of which are owned by prominent Kenyans. We have agreed to work on a modality to get Kenyan labor agencies to have offices here in Saudi Arabia.
The bold and daring human trafficking racket is on prowl, with the government seemingly unable to crack down with the ready slave market in the Middle East and notably Saudi Arabia. Our investigations have established that employment agencies, some briefcase firms, have retained their contact people in the flung remote and rural areas, either on retainer or commission basis, to act as the feeder agents to registered agencies to aid the illicit trade. The local contacts are said to be earning between 50,000 to 100,000 shillings for every girl they recruit and is successfully trafficked. Further, they are said to operate in cahoots with the rogue embassy employees who facilitate illegal processing of visas using particulars and data, including photos using forged documents.
It is very clear to me that the problems that Kenyans are facing in Saudi Arabia actually do not start here, but start at home. The system is flawed and corrupt, and unless fixed, nothing will change. There is massive corruption in the way Kenyans are prepared to come to be domestic workers in Saudi Arabia.
The cartel involves primary recruiters of girls, employment and travel agencies, officials from the National Employment Authority (NEA) and embassy staff. Those trafficked, mostly young girls and women, are forced into commercial sex, prostitution and hard labor in the Middle East countries under the guise of other greener pastures. Most of the victims have been on record calling for help back home. Today, a human rights lobby group agitating against skyrocketing cases of human trafficking indefinitely postponed a planned demonstration outside the Saudi Arabia embassy in Nairobi the last minute to pave way for talks between them and the Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs. The Center for Diaspora Affairs, the CDA, was to hold a peaceful protest on behalf of all the Kenyan victims in Saudi Arabia, the notice in part read. Speaking exclusively to the informer on phone, Executive Director of CDA John Maina said they are engaged in prolonged dialogue with the Principal Secretary, State Department for Diaspora Affairs, Ministry of Foreign and Diaspora Affairs, Rosalind Njogu. The activist said the meeting was meant to address areas of concern ahead of their planned demonstration to the Saudi Arabia embassy in the country over the same issues and problems Kenyans are going through abroad. In November last year, following national outrage over fate of Kenyans illegally trafficked in Saudi Arabia, Foreign and Diaspora Affairs Cabinet Secretary Alfred Mutua was engaged in a 2-day bilateral crisis talks when he visited the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in November 2022 without yielding any results to curb the thriving illicit multi-billion-dollar trade. 2 weeks after CS Mutua's visit in the Saudi, 3 corpses of Kenyan origin, adding to hundreds who sought employment opportunities as domestic workers in Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, were reported. Their demise is said to have occurred under unclear circumstances as well. The families of the 3, led by Odhiambo from Nakuru, whom are unable to cater for the repatriation of their loved ones from the Arab country back home for a befitting send-off, have called on the government to help in the facilitation of their transportation and ensure justice to what led to their death. The Saudi authorities have threatened to go ahead and bury the 3 bodies should there be no urgent solution from Kenyan counterpart. Mutua promised to find lasting solutions to the challenges Kenyans continue to experience, starting with institutionalizing of reforms as he targets Kenyans, agents, Kenyan government officials, and Saudi government officials by registering and actualizing stringent rules and regulations so as to rescue innocent and suspecting Kenyans seeking to work in deplorable conditions in the Gulf states. Mutua called on both governments to unite, fight the vice, and pledge to break cartels and the unscrupulous agencies operating in the business.
Kenyan immigration officers will also not allow Kenyans to travel out of Kenya to Saudi Arabia as domestic workers without fulfilling the set requirements.
The CAs held bilateral talks with his counterpart, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Vice Minister of Labour, His Excellency Dr. Abdullahi Nasir Abtamain of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to deepen bilateral and trade relations for the benefit of the two countries' citizens. During his visit, Mutua also met Kenyans living and working in Saudi Arabia to get first-hand information about the challenges they have faced while working there. Before his travel, the CS met the employment agent representatives to understand their issues and how the government could work to address parties involved amicably, which he said the meeting was informative with complex, mind-boggling revelations and a deep cry for help in many instances. In its 2020 Trafficking of Persons report, the US State Department noted that Kenya remains a source, transit point, and destination for people subjected to sex trafficking and forced labor. The report observed that the Kenyan government does not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking, but it is making significant efforts to do so. The department, however, noted that the government has maintained uneven law enforcement efforts. The Counter-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2010 criminalized sex trafficking and labor trafficking and prescribed penalties of 30 years to life imprisonment, a fine of not less than 30 million shillings or both. These penalties, the US State Department notes, are sufficiently stringent, but observes that by allowing for a fine in a lieu of imprisonment for sex trafficking, these penalties were not commensurate with those for the other serious crimes, such as rape. A recent report by the National Crime Research Center (NCRC) shows that the prevalent forms of human trafficking in Kenya are labor and sex related, with the majority of those trafficking being forced to work in brothels abroad. According to the report, sex trafficking stands at 53%, with the labor at 44%, with most affected being women at 41%, children at 43%, and men at 26%. Kenyans are mostly recruited by legal or illegal employment agencies or voluntarily migrate to Europe, the United States of America, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, and the Oman. The report states that they migrate to these countries in search for employment, where they are exploited in domestic servitude, massage parlors and brothels, or forced manual labor. Stanley Lugaria, the informer, uncovering the truth.